everyone, and welcome to KELOLAND in Session. I'm your host, Maddie Paul. The 2026 legislative session for South Dakota began on January 13th, and as lawmakers spend the next 38 days in Pierre drafting and debating proposed laws, KELOLAND in Session will bring you the latest weekly updates. This week's episode features our reporters and photojournalists who reported in Pierre. That includes Dan Santella, Sophie Hall, and our dedicated Capitol Bureau reporter, Bob Mercer. When I spoke to Bob earlier this week about some key differences seen so far in the 2026 legislative session, he mentioned Governor Larry Roden's weekly news conferences, a tradition that had been returned after former Governor Kristi Noem stopped them or just reduced its time. Here's Bob's perspective.
Let's turn back the calendar 2 years. When Kristi Noem was governor at that time, in her final year as governor, she just stopped doing legislative news conferences. They'd been a tradition. I've covered the Capitol since 1985, and they'd been a tradition all of that time. Every governor had them until Kristi Noem didn't have them. And she never explained why. We asked, reporters asked, never got an answer, just didn't want to meet with us. And in one respect, that was good because that meant we could go cover committee meetings, which are going on at the same time as the news conferences on those mornings. But on the other hand, we didn't get to know what the governor's perspectives were on the legislation moving through and what she thought. When Governor Roden became governor a year ago, after Kristi resigned to become Homeland Security Secretary, he promised to be transparent and that he would hold news conferences every week during legislative session, and he has done that. And so he restored that tradition, and it's an important tradition, frankly.
We'll hear more from Bob Mercer later in KELOLAND in Session. But first, the South Dakota legislative session kicked off with Governor Roden delivering the State of the State address. This was his first one as governor. Dan Santella gives us this report from Pierre.
When it comes to how South Dakotans feel the impact of property taxes, Governor Larry Roden wants individual counties to have a choice.
I propose that we cut owner-occupied taxes by giving the people of each county a simple option. Replace the county's share of property taxes with a half-cent sales tax.
Roden highlighted Clay, Union, and Turner counties, along with the Black Hills and Sioux Falls, as areas especially impacted by the weight of property taxes.
The areas with the biggest property tax increase are also those that attract the most visitors. So this proposal will allow those counties to cut property taxes and draw more revenues from tourists and out-of-staters. We've modeled this carefully, and we've estimated impacts in every county.
Healthcare beyond the state's population centers also had Roden's attention today.
This is a big year for rural health in South Dakota. Our state was recently awarded $189 million in federal funding for our Rural Health Transformation Plan. This is the first year of a 5-year investment to strengthen healthcare access across our state. As I told you in the budget address, we planned for $100 million a year. So this higher award is a major win for South Dakota.
And as the legislative session kicks off, the governor pledges to have another discussion involving health, one which promises to bring impassioned voices from each side of its debate.
This session, I'll be working with legislators and the Attorney General on legislation to stop abortion pills from coming into South Dakota.
We're taking a quick break, but when we come back, we'll hear about Dan's trip to Pierre with photojournalist Sophie Hall and how they found lawmakers to react to Roden's address. Stay with us. We'll be right back on KELOLAND in Session. Welcome back to KELOLAND in session. Governor Larry Roden's first State of the State address is in the books. Dan Santella and our photojournalist Sophie Hall were in the House chamber for Roden's remarks at the state capitol in Pierre, and we're going to talk a little bit about what was said, seen, and heard during that State of the State address. So, Dan, I'll start off asking you this question. Roden's address covered property taxes, health care, including abortion pills, education, even cybersecurity, national security, just lots of points of topics of interest. So what stood out the most to you in what was emphasized in Roden's address?
His property tax proposal. We know that's a huge focus in South Dakota politics in early 2026. And of course, he's proposing each county have an option of replacing the property tax share with the half-cent sales tax. I ran into Bob Mercer, Sophie and I did shortly after the address, and I was like, Bob, what was your big takeaway? And he was like, well, the property tax proposal and then pledging legislation and work against abortion pill access. Those were Bob's big takeaways, and I agree, too, that as far as newsy developments from the address, those sort of stuck out.
Was there anything that was notably left out of the address?
Wasn't a lot of discussion of increasing teacher pay. We know that's had a lot of attention in South Dakota recently, and since the budget address in December, there was, I believe, a very, very brief mention of that, but certainly not a lot.
And Sophie, for you, what was the most important aspect for you to capture as a photojournalist as this address was going on?
Well, Dan and I talked before about kind of the important lawmakers in the Capitol and making sure that I'm getting those people, John Hanson in particular, who was running the House prior and was sitting next to the governor before the speech. And, you know, you could kind of tell in certain aspects of the speech, he really agreed with the governor. In certain aspects, he really didn't. And and just going around the room and making sure I'm getting those important people and kind of getting the reactions to the speech while it's happening.
Right, because after Roden's address, you both looked for lawmakers to speak to for their reaction to the address. And I'll play the reactions that aired, I believe, on Tuesday.
Governor Roden hit pretty well on especially the rural transformation funding, you know, pushing it toward rural health, really looking at making changes in the state for rural health, and where a lot of times I think it wasn't prioritized, and I think Governor Roden hit it spot on to really look at that.
The question we're all wrestling with is, how do you do that? How is the best way to do it? And one of the things we always talk about local control, and we talk about shifting taxes, shifting the burden. Well, I think there's ways we can do that without shifting the burden.
Dan, I think you said before we started talking for this session that we're going to hear a lot of reactions as we go forward with the legislative session. But from the reactions that you've heard so far this first week of the legislative session, is there an attitude that there's been created for what's going forward in the legislative session?
What Representative Randolph was talking about there, we talking about property taxes and that big question, and that's going to command a lot of attention, I think. And that was clear. I liked that commentary from him because he was like kind of spelling out how he considers it all and how he frames the question. Dollars and cents are always big in Pierre, and we know, and it's an election year, as Sophie said a minute ago. You know, so when we were talking about how we're going to cover it, we want to bear that in mind. There's several people in the legislature involved in that. Governor Roden's running to keep that office, as Sophie said. John Hanson's running for governor. Casey Crabtree's running for our only U.S. House spot in Washington. Marty Jackley, who was there as well, we both saw. He's running for that same spot that Crabtree's going for. So it'll be interesting to see. I've written this before, but how do electoral politics impact legislative politics in Pierre?
So do you think that's something our viewers should keep an eye on going forward, or what else do you think our viewers should know of going forward?
Yeah, I think, the clock is ticking until the primary on June 2nd. Sophie and I were also talking about that. We were going to have so many places to be that day as a newsroom, and photojournalists are going to be, they're always rock stars, but, we're going to have to capture so many angles and visuals and live shots come June 2nd, not just in Pierre, but we have Sioux Falls mayoral race.
Yeah, the mayoral race, of which Jamie Smith is also running. So I had to make sure that, I was getting not just the state level of who's running, but also the local level. And Dan and I talk about that a lot before, okay, what are the locations? Who are the people? Who are we talking to? And who could we potentially talk to after, just to make sure that I have video of those people if we need to intro them. And yeah, just a lot of communication between Dan and I day of, and it's always changing.
Well, thank you both for being here and sharing those details at the digital desk for KELOLAND in session. And everyone stick around. We're going to be hearing from our Capitol Bureau reporter, Bob Mercer, when we come back after the break. You're watching KELOLAND in session. Welcome back to KELOLAND in session. On Wednesday, January 14th, the legislative session focused on the state of tribes. Our Capitol Bureau reporter, Bob Mercer, created stories based off of what he heard and saw during that.
One of the things that stood out for me was that the speech was short and direct and to the point. In past years, there was, more rhetoric. This was to the point. And Governor Roden and some of the other Supreme Court justices were in the gallery. The gallery was packed, and with people from all sides, and some of the things that stood out in the speech were the tribes would like to have state government turn responsibility for Medicaid services over to the tribal government for their own people. It would benefit the state of South Dakota because state government pays nearly half of the cost for Medicaid services. And so it could save state government millions, maybe even $10 million a year if that were to happen. And Kathleen Woodenknife, the president of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, said that they've been in negotiations with the Roden administration about that. And there is legislation in this year that would set up a workforce, if you will, that would report back to the governor in December of 2028, with whatever they found out about this. So there's a long, it's maybe a long-term plan, but it's going to be it could be a beneficial one for the state of South Dakota and for the tribal governments, because then they would be able to more directly get services to their tribal members. Another thing that President Woodenknife talked about was bringing enforcement against what are known as prediction markets. And what they are ways for people to take bets about sporting events without going through what the state constitution requires, which says that sporting bets have to be placed either in Deadwood at casinos there or at tribal casinos, and they're not authorized anywhere else in South Dakota. And so she would like enforcement against that. So those are kind of two of the highlights. The other great surprise of the day was the meeting that was held afterward with Governor Roden and about 50 of the different tribal government people who had come to South Dakota or come to the state capitol for the speech. And that meeting was private, but I asked the governor about it today and what he thought of it. And he said that, he thought the speech was good and liked the speech, and that during the meeting that they laid out what they could do and what they can't do, what they were willing to do and not willing to do. And so there was a good give and take within that meeting.
On Thursday, January 15th, as Bob was just describing, Governor Larry Roden held a news conference concerning the legislative session so far. When Bob attended that conference, he did ask the governor questions about the session so far. And as he had just said, that included Roden's thoughts about how the State of the Tribes address went. So here's Roden's full response to Bob's question. I know Bob summarized it a little bit, but I'll play you a clip now of what Roden had said.
Yeah, well, I thought it was probably as good a State of the Tribes address that I've heard. It was short, it was to the point. She made the points of concern that she brought forward. And then we came in here for the meeting, and it was really an encouraging day all in all, because it started much sooner than that. I think one of the first meetings I had in the day when I stepped out of my office, and there were members of the Wagawasu tribe, a member of their councilmen standing out in the rotunda, and we had a great conversation then.
And during the news conference, Roden also answered questions about impeachment articles against Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. That story can be found right now on KELOLAND.com. Speaking of KELOLAND.com, KELOLAND News offers a dedicated web page on our website for all news related to the 2026 legislative session. Think of it like a one-stop shop. Here you can find all of the updated reports, background information on the legislative session in South Dakota. That includes some history, examples of bills, key details about the state House and Senate, and much more. This webpage even includes past reports of legislative sessions, including 2025, 2024, and 2023. So I'm just going to go ahead and briefly show you everything that I just mentioned on this webpage. To find it, you go up to the news category and scroll down till you find South Dakota legislative session. Once you click on it, it takes you to our webpage, and you can start scrolling and see one of our top videos and also our most recent stories that have come up that are related to the 2026 legislative session. The most recent one will always pop up at the top of the bullet first. If you scroll down a little bit more, there's a way for you to just subscribe to our Capitol News Bureau newsletter, which we'll talk about in our next segment of KELOLAND in Session. Once again, another video that you can watch and some history behind the legislative session in South Dakota. Scroll down even more, you can learn about the State House and Senate, an example of what a bill looks like for your own reference. And then this is the part, when you scroll down even further, you could see our past legislative session coverage. This includes, as you can see here, 2025. Scroll down even more and you get 2024, leading into 2023. We're going to take another quick break, but when we come back, we're learning about what we can expect in the next week of the legislative session. So stay with us. We'll be right back with that news. Welcome back to KELOLAND in Session. Before we end the show, Bob Mercer gives us an idea of what to expect for next week during the South Dakota legislative session.
You know, the legislature won't meet on Monday because it's Martin Luther King federal and state holiday. So when they come back on Tuesday to the Capitol, all the committees will be in full gear in the mornings, and floor sessions will run in the afternoons. The Joint Committee on Appropriations is going to have a couple of important hearings on two of state government's biggest spending departments. And so the Department of Social Services will be on, or Department of Human Services will be on Tuesday, and the hearing on the Department of Social Services will be on Wednesday. And why those are significant is because they run Medicaid in South Dakota, and South Dakota state government's costs for Medicaid are going up by about $11 million in the coming year. And so those costs are going up at the same time that the governor was unable to recommend any increases at all for state aid to education, or for Medicaid providers, or for state government employees. And so that there's that give and take. And so that, if you go back to where we talked about with the tribal governments possibly taking over management of Medicaid for their tribal members, that could free up some money to put to other purposes, such as state aid to education or reimbursement for Medicaid providers.
Great information. And, you can also subscribe to our Capitol Bureau newsletters through email. And Bob Mercer can explain that for himself.
And the way you can sign up for a newsletter is if you go to KELOLAND.com on the internet, and there's going to be a main bar at the top, and there are topics to pick from or categories to pick from. You want to pick the About category. And what will then come up under the About category is a drop-down box. And then you can find on there a category for newsletters. If you click on that, that'll take you to the newsletters page. And at that newsletters page, you can just put in your email address, choose the newsletters you want to receive, including the legislative newsletter that comes out each day of legislative session, Monday through Friday. And then hit the sign up button at the bottom and you're good to go.
And that is our time for this week's edition of KELOLAND in Session. This show will air every Friday at 3 o'clock Central Time during the South Dakota legislative session. So join us every Friday right here on KELOLAND Plus. Until next time, have a great day, everyone.